While Gellan watched Gillian continue to undo the thick, heavy straps, a light rushing sound next to his ear made him flinch, and he saw a small black shape with outstretched wings soar in a long arch up to the roof of the gray Georgian building. When it landed, it called down to him with its familiar, chirrupy hoot. Gellan's heart lifted a bit. His little friend had followed him to Kremstall. "Where do you keep him?" he asked Gillian, pointing up at Torlin as she climbed down the ladder on the front of carriage. "I don't," Gillian replied, jumping off the last rung. "He lives on one of the outer islands with the other macrodons. They mostly eat fish from the ocean, but sometimes they'll eat rabbits and other rodents, and they graze on grasses or fresh leaves." "How often do you use him?" "Not often." She walked over to Gellan, a heap of harnesses over her shoulder. She was tall, with rich brown skin and wavy black hair. "Are you interested in magical creatures?" "I don't know," said Gellan. "He's the first one I've seen, I think." Gellan suddenly felt another, larger rush of air hit him, and he ducked his head. Torlin had unfurled his wings. With a graceful sweep he rose into the sky and flew off. Gellan watched him go for a moment, then suddenly realized that Wilkes was bellowing his name across the square. "Bye," Gellan said hastily to Gillian as he began walking away, "and thanks for—" He didn't quite know what to say. Gillian nodded and walked off, and Gellan turned and jogged over to where Drina and Wilkes were standing. There were two normal-sized adults and one very short one in their greeting party. Gellan did a double-take, quite sure he might be looking at a fantastical dwarf for the first time in his life, like the ones he'd read about in fairy tales. Only he didn't quite look like Gellan had imagined. He tried not to stare at the dwarf, who was rocking back and forth on his feet, though it would have been perfectly fair, since that was exactly what the dwarf was doing to him. The dwarf's eyes were an extraordinarily light blue color, and he didn't seem to need to blink very often. Despite looking very young, his hair was a rich, bright silvery color, and his skin was so pale it had a bluish-gray tone to it. "Gellan," said Wilkes, motioning toward a dark-haired woman with olive skin. Gellan looked up and tried to focus on the humans in front of him. "This is Madame Deyan, the governor of Kremstall." She nodded at Gellan, and he nodded back. "This," motioning to the younger man with light brown hair, "is Roman Roberts." "I'm the one that you've been writing to all this time," interjected Roman, holding out his hand with a broad smile. Gellan took his hand and shook it briefly. Roman's eyes seemed kind and cheerful, but Gellan had learned that you couldn't always trust appearances. "And this is Worley, one of the Pipkins from the school," finished Wilkes. "Hi," said Gellan, feeling awkward and mistrustful, and not quite sure he'd heard Wilkes correctly. "I'll take Master Gellan's trunk," said Worley in a croaky little voice that made Gellan jump. Wilkes nodded at him and placed the trunk on the little cart next to Worley, who immediately set off with it. "And if the rest of you will follow me," said Madame Deyan, turning and heading for the glittering white building.